Okay, so that was just a bit of a background to what we've been doing over the last couple of years in our transition to regenerative agriculture. I will move straight on to talking about why we think that's so important. And these two photos of our farm sum it up for me the best. So the one on the left was just after this winter, or so during this winter, but this winter was the wettest winter. But last year's winter was the wettest winter. 2 winters before that, it was the wettest winter ever on record. And we're just seeing that trend go in only one direction. So not only is we actually mapped this year, we got this drone footage and then we mapped it, and we calculated that 50% of our grazing, or our farmland in total, not just our grazing, goes underwater in a flood. And even if it doesn't flood to quite this extreme, it's definitely it's so wet it's unusable, and that's only kind of increasing. And what we then do is transition over to the picture on the right hand side where you see severe drought. So that is not an arable field, that's actually a grass field, that picture there. And I think it was last spring where it really hit me when we'd had the wettest winter on record ever, and then we were lambing in April and we had cracks in the ground, and it was just this like, where has all the water gone? This is like unreal. We haven't got enough grass in the spring and we've got such dry ground. Yet we've had the wettest winter ever, and that was a kind of one of the defining moments of what there's got to be something in this. We need to look at it differently. And the other thing just to mention about the picture on the left with the flooding is you can see the River Thames running through the middle of all of the flooded fields. And you can see that it is grey with soil, and I don't think I'd ever really appreciated this until I saw this picture. But that is just, we're not far from London, and that goes then out into the sea, and that is just all fellow farmers' soil from further up, upstream. And that just also is really stark to me as well, in that I kind of imagined that soil erosion was a thing that happened in places where there are more extreme climates. But when I start to look at these photos, I realise that we're seeing some of these extremes right here. I realise we're over the water from you, but this is just kind of sharing our experience here. We've at least got some similarities of climate, although I'm guessing you're getting more rain. And so what have we been doing? I talked about adaptive multi-paddock grazing, or regenerative grazing, on the video briefly. I didn't really talk about what it was. There's only so much you can kind of say in a video. So I just wanted to move on to this to give a bit of an explanation about what we are doing. So what we're trying to do is mimic nature in regenerative systems. That's how I see it, is that what we're trying to do is mimic nature. Because when I started reading about these things, I learned that actually nature, in places where nature is really productive, say the Amazon, like the amount of biomass it produced, like it might not be food that we can eat, but biomass it produces is more than any farm system on earth, anything that we can create. And I further learned this when I started looking at our soil health, and the way that we do our soil health tests is we just do visual tests. So we look at, like, in the middle of the field, and then we look at either the verge or the riverbank. And I see that where the areas where we don't manage it actually is producing a lot. Like we see road verges growing more grass than we've got in our fields, and that's a bit crazy. I'm not saying we let our fields go and don't do anything with them, but we just started to think about what's going on there, what might we want to do. So we use adaptive multi-paddock grazing, sometimes called holistic planned grazing, depending on your thought process. We work with the adaptive model because of that keyword in adaptive. It's ever changing, and everything changes. Nature changes, and we need to adapt our grazing patterns in order to make the best of what we've got, and also in a disruptive way. In order to disrupt things in a different way, we might decide to leave a field for a whole year and not graze it, or we might decide to graze another field much more intensively, depending on what we're trying to achieve. But with adaptive multi-paddock grazing, what we're doing is really simple. There's 3 things. It's a high number of animals, or as high as we have on the farm, and can manage in one group in a small area for a short period of time, splitting up those, followed by a long rest period. We split the fields up with electric fencing, and the reason for that is mimicking that natural predator that we don't have, but because what we're trying to do in this system is mimic natural systems. And if animals had access to the whole of the UK, let's say they just roamed around, they would roam in large herds, and there would be predators there as well. So they would roam in large herds to be protected against predators, but they would keep close together and they would move on frequently. So they were constantly getting a fresh bite of grass. So we're just trying to mimic that. And we would work on approximately 2-day shifts. So we'd be moving animals every 2 days. And we're doing it with both our cattle and our sheep. Sheep, a bit more challenging with electric fencing, but we found that as opposed to precision grazing or techno grazing, where we're focused on absolute utilization and we're really pushing the animals to eat everything down, then of course sheep get hungry, and we all know sheep, and start pushing through the fence. But with this system of working on optimizing the amount that we're taking, so we're definitely not taking all the material, because we want to leave material behind to create ground cover, to prevent evaporation, or to keep the soil warmer in winter. And as Humphrey said on the video, like I would say that's the one thing we really struggled to get our head around, was that leaving grass behind. It looks messy and it's waste, but what we've learned is that it's not waste, as Humphrey said, and it's either carbon to feed the soil, or it acts as a cover to keep the soil warm or to keep the moisture down there. And then that directly links to our productivity. So if we could have green grass growing all the way through our season, like we see, we don't have that burnt off grass in the summer, that's what we're aiming for. Like, how can we keep more moisture in the soil? So that and just for those of you measuring grass, to give you an indication, in the old days when we were measuring grass and kind of focus on utilization, we'd be going in at 2.5 kilograms of dry matter a hectare and coming out about 1,700. But now we're kind of going in at 3,500 plus. If we could grow more, we would. But we find all our plants, they used to be grazed off really quickly, so they tend to go to seed when they're only this high. What we want is more biomass above ground, more plants and grass, because it's more photosynthesis. And as the previous speaker mentioned, more photosynthesis, it's more energy, more carbon in the soil, and more energy to feed. And it's that kind of redefining productivity almost, to think about it in a different way. And we're moving, practically speaking, you see some people talk about moving animals every few hours or doing a thing like that. We find about a 2-day move, but again, it can be adaptive. If someone's going on holiday and that's not going to be possible, then we'll make the paddocks bigger. The great thing is that we can kind of put ourselves in charge of what we're doing, which is nice. And I see I have my timer set so that I have 1 minute left, so I'm going to move on. And what this looks like in practice then for us is this. We would like to be growing a lot taller grass than we see on the left, but that's one of our permanent pastures that's been rested for around 6 months. We kind of target rest periods of, our target is 6 months. We definitely can't achieve that because that's too long. So what we look at is what needs 6 months rest and what can afford to be grazed more frequently. And we would be working on maybe a minimum of 45-day rest. That would be where we're at. And what that allows is the roots to grow longer, because what's above the ground is below the ground. So the longer the grass we let it grow, the deeper the roots go. And that brings productivity, in that it's able to tap into deeper water sources and tap into minerals that we maybe can't get in the shallower soil. We don't see the problems we'd expect with feet in sheep and other things. We've actually found it's worked really well. And the picture on the right is one of our herbal lays. We've been planting herbal lays for a few years, and stop that. Oh, hang on, stop. Didn't realize it'd make a noise. And so we've been planting, and we find that diversity really good. And when we look at our soil, we're seeing that herbal lays are great because they're like a super injection of biological activity in the soil on our arable ground. So whereas in the past we would have put in grass clover, pretty simple mixes, what we learn now is that diversity is key. So the more species we can put in the better. But what we also want to look at is that's of course an established lay. It takes possibly often soil disturbance. We're organic, so soil disturbance to get it established. There's a downtime while we're waiting for it to grow. So we're kind of now looking at those herbal layers and thinking, how could we replicate that diversity and the benefits we get from that in our permanent pasture? And rest is one way of doing that, because the other thing, I'd never heard the word latent seed bed until a year ago, but now I know that, I think anyway, not a scientist, but I think that's basically the seeds that are in the soil. They're there and they just kind of go ungerminated until the conditions allow them to actually germinate and go. And some of the herbs, as we know, those plant herbal layers and things, and the smaller seeds like the clovers, they're more difficult, they're more vulnerable to establish, they take longer to come through. And so because when we're constantly cutting and grazing, then those other species don't get a chance to thrive. And what we found even on our organic permanent pasture is that we're actually like fairly monoculture. We've only got maybe 2, 3, 4 species of grass. There's of course a few weeds thrown in there, and weeds is another subject. They're not weeds anymore. For me, they're indicators of what's going on, and I don't worry about them. But yeah, how do we kind of, diversity is key. Biodiversity we often think is just about the environment, but actually if we bring diversity into our farming systems, we're delivering biodiversity for everybody, public money for public good, and however you want to look at it. So that's a really quick whiz through what we've been doing, and I will finish it there.